Hello, my name is Jennifer Wang, and I am the Chief Strategic Partnerships and Research Officer for the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, or NAPW. My organization builds power with Asian American and Pacific Islander women and girls so that we can have full agency over our lives, our families, and our communities. I'm thrilled to be joining this year's rePRO Film Fest because we are an organization that uses the intersectional reproductive justice lens to ensure that Asian American and Pacific Islander women and girls are at the table when key decisions about us are being made. Sharing critical stories through film has the power to touch the hearts and minds of people across the country and humanize parents and pregnant people. Whether you're returning or just joining us for the first time this year, we're so grateful that you're with us. Through knowledge, intention, and action, rePRO is the only film festival in the world dedicated to reproductive justice, advocating for inclusive reproductive health care, justice, and bodily autonomy for women, cis, trans, and non-binary alike. When you purchase tickets and donate to rePRO, you've become an active participant of change, as all net ticket sales support 3 beneficiary organizations: Black Women's Health Imperative, the Lilith Fund, and No More Secrets. Get all the info about them at reprofilmfest.com. We'd like to thank all of our sponsors, including Bloomberg Philanthropies, Stober Lafer Foundation, and Lori M. Tisch Illumination Fund, and the Shepherd Foundation. Welcome to our call to action conversation and Q&A for the feature documentary Bei Bei. Today, we'll be talking about how Bei Bai's story depicts how political, cultural, and legal forces in the U.S. conspire to disrupt and wreck the lives of society's most vulnerable and marginalized people, immigrant women. I'm honored to introduce our special guests for this conversation today. Marion Lipschutz and Rosenblatt, directors and producers of the documentary Bei Bei, among an impressive filmography of films about women's fight for reproductive justice. And Lynn Paltrow, founder and executive director of National Advocates for Pregnant Women. And again, I'm Jennifer Wang from the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. So let's get started. Let's jump right in. I'm going to be both moderating and trying to participate in the conversation at the same time. First off, Marian and Rose, tell us about your filmography and how you came to focus on women's reproductive health and rights.
Marian, you're first, so you start.
Lucky me. Rose and I always trade off questions. The first film we made was called The Abortion Pill, which was about RU 486, called The Moral Property of Women. And when we made that film, we saw, recognized an outrage. And both of us, abortion had experiences very close to the time when abortion was illegal. Both of us had experiences. I actually was out of the country when I was 17, got pregnant, had an illegal abortion. I remember how terrifying it was. That wasn't the only thing that drew me to this field, but it gave me a very visceral foundation for understanding control over your own body as being so fundamental to everything else. We made that first film, thought we were done. We've now made, I think, something like 5 films on the topic. Not really focused so much on Roe v. Wade, but on the constellation of factors around reproductive justice.
Can I just add that after those 5 films, we said, no, we're going to do something very different next. Not reproductive justice, but something very different. And then we did Bei Bei, which we did Bei Bei because Lynn Paltrow we met with her and she told us the story of this was just happening there. And Lynn opened the door for us to be able to go there and start filming, gave us access to Linda Pence and Bei Bei. So we saw an amazing story that we just had to pursue, and we did.
And Lynn, it sounds like you were the one who kind of started it all for Marian and Rose. How did you first learn about what was happening to Bei Bei Shuai? And do you remember how you felt when you had heard the news that this was happening to her?
Yes, I remember well. National Advocates for Pregnant Women provides pro bono legal defense for all kinds of women who are being targeted, arrested, detained, and otherwise penalized because they were pregnant. Whatever's happening to them, whatever punitive, inappropriate thing that's happening to them wouldn't have happened but for pregnancy. And we had a staff attorney named Kate Jack, who's originally from Indiana, and she had just decided to move back. And very shortly after she moved back, she heard about this case. And we asked her to offer her and our services to Bei Bei Shuai as soon as it happened. Linda Spence also became her attorney, and we were working on it from the beginning. I have a limitless capacity, apparently, for outrage. Here was a case in which somebody was being penalized for having attempted suicide. If she hadn't been pregnant, there's no crime of attempted suicide in Indiana. So they made up this crime based on the fact that she happened to be pregnant when she became so distraught that she attempted suicide. And Rose and Marion were coming to the office to just talk about ideas the day we learned that our motion to dismiss had failed. And we knew the case was going to trial, and I knew enough about filmmaking to know that if a filmmaker could get in at the trial stage, that they could tell a whole story from beginning to end.
And that's why it was so exciting, except it ended up that there was no trial.
Which was the goal, because what we know is, there's a cognitive thing that if it comes out of a woman's body, it must be her fault. It doesn't matter what the science is. It doesn't matter what the law is. It doesn't matter what justice is. And so we try to do everything we can to keep things from ever getting to a trial because of that sort of prejudice and presumption that people have about the superpowers of people who get pregnant.
Can I ask Jennifer, because you've presented the film now and seen it 3 times, so I'd like to hear your thoughts around it.
I mean, it is slightly different watching it this time around in the context of what I think most people now have seen has been happening to Asian American people across the United States. The racial profiling, the anti-Asian hate and violence. Women have been reporting 2 times the level of racism and violence than men because I think, as we all know, women, particularly immigrant women, people just perceive as people who need to be targeted. I mean, that certainly happened to Bei Bei, right? And so this time around watching it, I really was watching it in the context of the last 18 months that we've all had, but that has been just a horrible time for my own community. I think more generally, because I'm a person who does work in this area, and because my organization works in this area, it's unfortunately not. It is a shocking story, but it is unfortunately one that I think we who work in this space, I think, Lynn, you'll probably might also agree with this because of what you just said, that people seem to just have this very racist and sexist way of targeting women for their specific pregnancy outcomes. And I think because we're an organization that works on reproductive health and rights, because we work on immigrant rights, racial justice, and certainly economic justice at all of these intersections, hearing about this story and seeing it on film is really, I think, watching our day-to-day work get personified. We're an organization that is immensely concerned with the criminalization of pregnant people and of pregnant immigrants and of women's bodies more generally, particularly Asian American and Pacific Islander women. So I watch and I internalize this film with all of that context, while also working on policy and structural change to try to get this to not happen to anyone else again. I'd like to hear a bit more, Marion and Rose, about what the process of making a documentary film about this issue, about an Asian American woman, about a woman of color, about an immigrant woman, and about certainly a, court case was like. If you could talk about what the day-to-day was actually like for the two of you making this film.
If I start, Rose, and then you want to pick up with how the legal outcome affected the story?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. When we go into any community, we made a film on the Pine Ridge Reservation. We're doing one in a Latinx community now. I always say it's you're kind of the uninvited guest at the party. And so you come in knowing that and, just learning as much as you can about that particular situation. So in Bei Bai's case, we were at first, there were a couple surprises. She'd been widely described as a restaurant worker. She was actually extremely entrepreneurial. She was running that restaurant. There were a number of people working with her in the restaurant, and we were really excited that we were going to be able to create that sense of the community that she was in. Unfortunately, during the course of the trial, and it was a really sad, and it's now evened out, and Bei Bai's back to being friends with them, but for a period, they really backed off from her, and it was painful, for a variety of reasons. But that meant then from a filmmaking point of view, we felt bad about it. And, from a filmmaking point of view, it was terrible because she was very isolated, but you still want to see the community around her. So then, and where she's coming from and what her life's like. So we made a virtue of that isolation. And she had developed and was developing a very close relationship with Linda, her lawyer. Well, people have just seen the film, so they know that. And so that then became the heart of the story. And we anticipated following this unfolding of their relationship in tandem with the court case. And then this is what happened, Rose.
Yeah, so then there was no trial. We sort of banked on there being a trial. So, we squirreled away all our nuts and, saving them, for shooting during this trial, because we thought we would be shooting every day. And we structured conceptually the film based on that. And then when that didn't happen, it was like, oh my God, what do we do? Like, what is, how do you make this dramatic? What's the arc? I mean, all the kinds of questions that suddenly come to the fore when you're making a documentary, and reality screws with you, So, but, that relationship between Linda and Bei Bei was a very, very interesting one, because Linda's very, very tough. And she really, and Bei Bei sort of started to experiencing her as her American mother. And she, to this day, when I talked to her last, I said, have you seen Linda? She said, on Mother's Day. Every Mother's Day they get together. It's very sweet. But, but otherwise, Linda is very tough, but she learned a lot in this, and you could see it in a way, a little bit of a radicalization, I think. I don't know, Lynn may not agree, but when we started, she had a certain concept of what this was, and then she began to understand the reproductive justice issues, and that was interesting to see. And Bei Bei was remarkable, and so this is the criminalization of mental health story too. I mean, she was definitely suicidal, very, very. I mean, we would kid around early on about this was like the modern Bei Bei was the modern Madame Bovary in a way, you know, the same kind of tortured mishap with love and life, you know, and but like Marion says, at the end, she's got this smarts, you know, she's running a real estate agent. She's doing a real estate. And she left the man she was with, who was really absolutely no good for her. And
not in the film, by the way. This
this is just recently.
She met and married somebody, but
right.
Yeah, she's got toughness. I mean, she will, I'm sure, for her entire life, this was a searing experience, and she still, I'm sure, struggles with mental health issues. But yeah, it was a funny experience because you're rooting for the trial, you know, not to go to trial. And at the same time, as a filmmaker, it's an absolute disaster because it's like you're telling a story, you're anticipating it's going to go this way, and then suddenly you lose your central action. So it was, but all films have their problems. So.
Lynn, I'm wondering if you could also touch on your observations of what was happening day by day, moment by moment during this time. Particularly interested in, you know, these intersections, right? The criminal justice system, a failure of the healthcare space. Certainly the immigration system was at play here. Like what was that like as an advocate and as an attorney to really work through and to observe in the moment?
Many of the cases that we work on are very, very intersectional. So they often involve, you know, white supremacy. They almost always involve male supremacy. They involve issues sometimes intersecting with reproduction and drug use or other health issues that people have. But what the case revealed were so many aspects of the lies that were told by the anti-abortion movement, by the folks, the kinds of arguments that Mississippi is currently making right now in the Supreme Court case that's being considered. One of the claims that the anti-abortion folks have made is, don't worry, if Roe is overturned, you won't get arrested for having an abortion. And they tell the lie that no one was arrested before Roe, which was simply not true. But there were very few arrests, primarily because we didn't have mass incarceration in 1973. That came in the 70s with the war on drugs. And I've read anti-choice authors say, well, you know, if a woman's arrested, she has mental health defenses and she'll be able to, you know, she'll show that she was just a victim. The story of Bei Bei Shuai is very important. If Roe is overturned and states can treat abortion as murder, because here they tried to treat somebody's suicide attempt and an unintended, a heartbreaking pregnancy loss as murder. Murder in Indiana is not a bailable offense. You're not allowed out on bail in Indiana at that time if you were charged with murder. And what Bei Bei had experienced was a tragic pregnancy loss. And it took us more than a year to get the courts to even give her bail. So she sat in jail for a year while Linda Pence and a whole group of people were fighting both to get her out on bail and to challenge the charge against her. And I think just what's overwhelming is the degree of absolute inhumanity. Here is somebody who is so distraught, she attempts suicide. She is found and survives. She undergoes major surgery, cesarean surgery, to give her baby the life she wants it to have. The baby dies in January 3rd, 3 days after she's had the cesarean section. Baby's then on suicide watch for nearly a month. She's finally through each of these horrible things. And then they arrest her about a month later and charge her with murder and attempted feticide. And, you know, these are the outrages that people understand are much not as uncommon as folks think. National Advocates for Pregnant Women has now documented more than 1,000 of these cases. They have historically disproportionately targeted women of color. Increasingly, though, it is now poor rural white women who are being arrested. And what you get to see are some of the places that humans have to evolve. I was flying out to Indiana to do some talks and work on the case, and probably one of the protests we helped do. And I was sitting next to somebody on the plane, and he asked, "Why are you going to Indiana?" And I told him Bei Bei Shuai's story, that she was so depressed that she attempted suicide while she was pregnant. And you know what the guy said to me? He turned to me and said, "She just should have waited till she wasn't pregnant anymore." As if because you're pregnant, you have some kind of superpower to control your depression, your suicidal tendencies. And it's just so dehumanizing to Bei Bei and to anybody who has the capacity for pregnancy.
Jennifer, do you think specific, I mean, we did hear people say, not publicly, but Terry Curry thought he could get away with it because she was poor, she was Asian, all those. Tell me, how does the work you do intersect?
Yeah, I think, Lynn, to your point, the trends of multiple instances of this happening to pregnant people of color is something that is that it's borne out in our lived experiences. And it's not just that law enforcement is investigating individuals one by one. That is, of course, happening, but there's actual systemic encouragement of racial profiling of pregnant people of color, right? There's, dozens of laws across the country encouraging doctors and medical providers to, racially profile their patients who are Asian or Asian American. These laws are called sex-selective abortion bans. And they're actively encouraging providers to racially profile people in their, health care offices based on outdated and false stereotypes about Asian and Asian American people. And the stereotype is that our community prefers sons, and that, we will have or use abortion care to get sons. And, this is it's a complete falsehood in the United States. There's, University of Chicago studies making it very clear that Asian American women are actually having more girl births than white women. And yet, this is a stereotype about people who look like me, people in my community, that has persisted in such a strong way that it has led lawmakers in, many states to not only try to pass, but successfully pass these sex-selective abortion bans. It's a complete canard, right? Because it's not something that's based in reality. But there are people who will take any opportunity to try to, tear down immigrants, to try to tear down people of color, and to try to completely eradicate reproductive health and rights for everyone. And it is, people living in poverty. It is people of color. It is rural people, to Lynn's point, who are going to bear the brunt of all of this, not just sex-selective abortion bans that encourage the racial profiling of Asian American and Asian people, but also what's happening at the Supreme Court this fall. Also, feticide laws like the ones that were used in Indiana to, do what the state and law enforcement and the courts did to Bei Bei, right? So I think that a story like this is extremely powerful in illustrating these intersections, and the work is real. it's immense, right? People seem to have many excuses to racially profile people who look like me right now. And, the last administration didn't help matters. It made it much worse. But just the other week, there was a man who lives a couple of blocks from me who experienced a, racist moment when he was walking near the observatory with his parents. And that story has just made the news. So everyday people are now treating Asian and Asian American people with a lot of suspicion because of what our government has encouraged. And at the state and local level, it's being taken way too far to really, attack the autonomy of people, especially, immigrants. In thinking and answering this question, I'm wondering, Lynn, if you can share what the current status of the feticide laws in Indiana are and throughout the US, and whether they're still being actively used against pregnant people.
They certainly are. 38 states have feticide laws, and these are laws that treat fetuses, but really in many of these states, it's simply the unborn from the moment of fertilization, as if they are already separate and should be thought of as separate crime victims. So this is part of attempting to, again, dehumanize the people who become pregnant, to pretend that the fertilized eggs, embryos, and fetuses inside of them are really separate. And the part that's very hard for people to, wrap their heads around is virtually every one of these laws, all 38 laws, were proposed in the wake of some hideous violence against a pregnant woman. And the law's intention was, okay, it's not enough to punish somebody for killing or hurting a pregnant person. We've got to have an additional separate penalty for the harm done to the fertilized eggs, embryo, or fetuses. We can acknowledge that being beaten up while you're pregnant is different from not being pregnant, but you can do that by enhancing the penalty, by recognizing the additional harm to the pregnant person themselves. These laws, many of them include an explicit explanation that the law is not intended to reach the pregnant person. And that was the case in California, which created the first feticide law in the country in 1970. And there's a prosecutor in the Central Valley who's been using it against Dora Perez and Chelsea Becker, locking up and charging women with murder who experience stillbirths. Experience of pregnancy loss is murder, according to this prosecutor, even though the law says straight up, you can't use this against the mother of the fetus. Indiana's feticide law was passed in the wake of a hideous murder of a pregnant bank teller. And again, it was a trick on the public. We're doing this to try to reduce violence against pregnant people, and it'll protect pregnant people and their future children. But really what they wanted to do was set up a challenge to Roe and articulate the fetus as if it is already separate. Now, Indiana's law was clearly intended only for the purpose of punishing third parties who attack pregnant women, not to punish the woman herself. But the prosecutor tried to use it that way in Bei Bei, and the outcome of that case didn't let them. There was another woman, Purvi Patel, who was then charged with feticide, also in Indiana, using that law, a woman who who used the medications misoprostol and mifepristone allegedly to end her pregnancy, and they tried to use the law against her. She was convicted. The feticide conviction was overturned, and the law was changed so that it now explicitly says this is not intended to penalize women who have abortions or women who can't guarantee a healthy birth outcome for anyone.
Listening to this, what's striking to me, and we've been making films on reproductive justice for, as we mentioned before, for decades. And the conversations that surround them, as well as the films themselves, are not nail on the head Roe v. Wade, but Roe v. Wade is what has, and there's always, every couple years, there's a big film about overturning Roe v. Wade. And there's so much education that remains to be done about the state, local, everything from the kinds of local prosecutors to school boards to communities to small laws that incrementally chip away. And one of our struggles as filmmakers is to do justice to that. At the same time, there's a big hunger for the big issue. They're going to overturn Roe v. Wade, abortion's threatened, and they'll, as I said, every 3 years, 4 years, maybe 5, there's a big film about it. So listening to you, I'm thinking too, it's a tough row to hoe to like give this much context, to sort of shift things away from the headline issue, which, God knows is a headline issue. So that's just an observation listening to you.
And, I think
it strike you too, Rose? Because it's been years, we've been doing this for a long time. And
well, I was wondering when I was listening to you, is since the film was made, where have we come? I mean, are we getting somewhere or not? I mean, that's what I'm wondering. I mean, connected to the idea of hope, or things look pretty awful now.
I think, what we're coalescing around at this moment is the feeling that even since 1973, since we, got the Roe decision, it's never been a full promise to communities of color. It's never been a full promise to the immigrant community. It's never been a full promise to poor people, to rural people who live in rural areas. And that's not to say that what's going to happen at the Supreme Court this fall isn't immensely important, right? Because again, these are the very people who will be bearing the brunt of a bad decision if that's what happens. But not only has the status of reproductive rights and health in the U.S. kind of experienced this chipping away, but we've never fully promised or fully guaranteed anything so that pregnant people, so that parents, so that entire communities of people of color and immigrants can thrive. And so I'm always encouraged to think about Bei Bei's story, to think about these moments where I think, Marian, you're hitting something. You're talking about this, like, well, how do we contextualize it for people? And that's the contextualizing, the nuance, like that is all in the lived experiences of people and what they are currently going through, right? All of that proves that we never fully got what we needed as a community. And now is the time to be thinking about what that actually is, right? And I think that many people at the local level are actually trying to dream up, like, okay, well, what does achieving reproductive rights, health, and justice actually look like at the local level? Like, that's actually a conversation that's happening on the ground to try to get us to a more positive note. I do want to make some time for viewer questions. So I am seeing one here now. How did you, Marian and Rose, develop such an intimate relationship with Bei Bei and Linda?
I'll start that, Marian, okay? I think that this is, every film that we've made, this was the goal, because our films are always, or have been, character-driven. So it's through a character that you learn about the issues and the context. And so that's very, very critical to us. And I think that we we came to make friends with them, and they came to trust us. There's always that stage, and it's a very important one. And once people trust that you really are there to, help them tell the story they want to tell, and they discover that they have something to tell, and when they trust you, they begin to tell it, and they begin to shape and form the documentary and let you know like what it should be. It's just a wonderful organic process, and you do it with them. And that's what happened. Bei Bei, Linda was discovering Bei Bei and herself. There was a mother-daughter relationship in a lot of ways. And Linda never had a daughter. She never had a son. And she discovered Bei Bei and discovered herself discovering Bei Bei through, the lens being trained on her and on them. And when Bei Bei understood that we were all there together helping her, she, of course, wanted to be part of this and tell her story. So it was wonderful symmetries that happened.
I have recently, I agree, to what Rose said, but during COVID, the experience of being on Zoom, one of the things that we always do, like famously long interviews. I mean, oh my God, we just now that there's video, you're not shooting film, right? So you can just go. We've had camera people fall asleep behind. In fact, I was interviewing once and Rose fell asleep. But
in all fairness, it was 3 a.m. in a London airport.
But I realized that the interview itself, and we do quite a few of them, is a really intimate space, and it really does build that kind of feeling that you get. And there is, this is something I'm more aware of now than I used to be, that it's a bit like therapy, right? Think about talking to a therapist on Zoom. It's not that far off. We are, far more respectful of boundaries. I also always tell people, and I mean this, at least people who I agree with, if you say anything, or there's something in the film that or in the, interview, or we always walk people through the finished film, that you really feel is going to be destructive, or you just don't want it, we will take it out. We will talk to you about it. We will take it out. It's not worth it. And I really do believe that. And it's never happened. Nobody has ever, except, if it is, it's something like, oh God, I just look so terrible in that cutaway, or, something that you're like, oh, sure, I'm happy to change it. So I think that helps too. But I do think that interviewing style, and God knows, sometimes I wish we could do a hell of a lot less, because you wind up with hours of interviews and hours of transcripts, and finally you have to shape a very economical story out of it.
It sounds like, Marion and Rose, what you were actually doing is just developing trust, an immense level of trust over time, which I think is very apparent when you watch the film. We've got another question here, and I think it's probably, Lynn, best for you to answer this one. Interesting how Bei Bei believed she would be taking her unborn child with her to the afterlife, and how that is a belief of Chinese culture. Lynn, could this ever have been a legal argument?
Well, certainly one of the many things that Linda did was find somebody who was an expert in Chinese culture and who could translate the suicide letter she wrote and give it context. Because what the prosecution tried to use that language to say, see, she was trying to kill her baby, which was anything but the truth. She was just so lost in her own pain. She wanted to end her life. And it had nothing to do with wanting to end her pregnancy. But I think certainly in any case, you use every tool you have and you try to educate people about the culture, about the humanity of the person who's on trial. But one thing I think people, again, don't understand is that if the law says, that fertilized eggs, embryos, and fetuses are separate, and you are brought before a judge, what your actual intent is doesn't matter. And the analogous case is Laura Pemberton didn't want to have cesarean surgery. She had 4 or 5 babies vaginally already. She had 1 cesarean. She didn't want to have another. To make a very long story short, she was forced to have cesarean surgery over her objection. She doesn't get a lawyer. They just violate her bodily integrity and her medical decision-making, her privacy, everything, cut her open. And when she sued to challenge what had happened to her, they described her decision not to have cesarean surgery as bravado and failing to consider the well-being of her unborn child. This is a woman who was going to take every baby God sent her way and went on to have 3 more babies vaginally after 2 cesareans. But the point I always made to her was they called her profound beliefs, her religious beliefs, and her trust of her own body as bravado, which got no recognition from the judge in that case. So people have to understand that once you're in court, what your intent really is often doesn't matter. So you want to keep it out of court. You want to keep this in your home, in your personal life, in the life of your community, but not with the police and the prosecutors and the courts.
Lynn, I've got another one for you here. Throughout this case, did anyone ever discuss, or did this question ever come up, what would have happened to Bei Bei if she had been in China?
I am not an expert on Chinese reproductive rights law, so I actually don't know that answer. And if anybody else in our panel does or watching, I'd love to hear it.
I actually do not know the answer either. My parents were born and raised in Taiwan, and I have no clue what would have happened to her had Bei Bei been in China. Marion, Rose?
I heard racist, things, and that's it. Like incredibly racist things about what would have happened in China. So,
Mm-hmm.
And people I talked to,
nothing founded in fact.
Yeah.
I saw that. So people say nothing. I think Mallory, abortion's legal in China. I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know. I do know that on a couple occasions I heard really
but remember we saw
anything, because those Chinese people, they just they believe in abortion and they just would do it just stupid, not just racist but stupid things.
But
Yeah.
I remember seeing Chinese stories about this from the Chinese press saying, look at what the stupid Americans are doing.
Yeah. So I don't think the discussion was. And actually, here's what's really interesting. The film got into the Guangzhou.
Shanghai.
It was at Shanghai International. It also got into Guangzhou Film Festival. And which was a prestigious big deal, mainland China, but it was pulled. And it was pulled during the early Trump, trashing China embargo, but it wasn't an embargo, and the programmer at the festival, normally nobody, I don't know, she probably didn't know nobody had told her, you don't tell people that it was pulled for political reasons. And we actually got an email telling us that. So the funny thing is that, the film made America look bad. And so it indeed got through Chinese censors. And that we know because we talked.
But it didn't get through U.S. censors.
Right.
But it did get through Chinese censors so that it could play in China, which was interesting. And the other thing that they kind of didn't see is that Bei Bei desperately wanted to stay in America. She did not want to go back to China. So we thought it was kind of funny that they were embracing, or, you know, that they were accepting a film that actually, if you listen closely to the content, you had a woman who was going to go to jail rather than go back to China. So, but that's kind of anecdotal, not. Someone asked whether the reception to our films has changed over the past 4 decades. Audiences are more savvy and aware. I think I would say when I was talking about that it's also the audiences are more niche. So that's a good and a bad thing. It's kind of like what you're talking about working on the grassroots level. So we get local, but there's also this big national conversation that sometimes isn't so into the local. I don't know.
We've got one final question, and I guess it's for the entire panel. How is Bei Bei today? You've begun to answer this at the start of this panel, but I think viewers are curious how Bei Bei's doing.
Rose spoke to her very recently, so Rose.
Yeah, I spoke to her last. Again, she is doing real estate. About 3 years ago, she married someone, an American, and it was not a good relationship, and he was abusive. And Linda and Carol Mayer, she has a strong support group around her, and that's part of the reason she didn't want to leave America. And I think I'm having issues. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me, so I'll do this.
She's a cliche, but she's a survivor. This was an extremely painful episode, it's not something she relishes revisiting. She's enormously resilient. And I think she went back to China, soon after the film finished. Saw her parents, saw her family, now has her papers, which, by the way, lapsed during the trial. So that was an unintended consequence of the trial. But, I think she's going to be okay.
She's calling herself Sunny now on her Facebook page. She doesn't want to call herself Bei Bei anymore, but Sunny. And I say that, and it seems to match her disposition of late. She really likes doing real estate.
Excellent.
Okay.
So I'm going to do a 2-part question to the entire panel. One thing that gives you hope, want to end on as positive a note as we can. And what's one thing that the audience can do if they're compelled to take action right now to fight against the criminalization of pregnant people? Anyone?
I'll start. So clearly that incredibly, good, serious advocacy can succeed, even in very difficult, even when the law really is being misused and the courts are more and more stacked against us. When you see very vigorous lawyering that National Advocates for Pregnant Women does, that Kate Jack and Linda Pence in Indiana do, and there was a tremendous amount of collective advocacy on behalf of Bei Bei, including NAPW, including the Religious Coalition for Abortion Rights, a whole range, people concerned with mental health issues. That advocacy, these cases demonstrate that organizing, speaking out, rallying, embarrassing prosecutors really, really can work. We have to keep fighting. We don't have a choice. I mean, we could lose Roe tomorrow. Women are still going to have abortions. Women are going to still have babies. People are still going to get pregnant. And we have to make sure that pregnancy isn't the excuse to deprive people of their civil and human rights. And to your point, Jennifer, Roe v. Wade was just the beginning. 1972 was the first time the Supreme Court ever said discrimination on the basis of sex violates the Equal Protection Clause. Roe v. Wade happened the next year. And in fact, Roe had been argued twice. For the first time in 1971, before there was a single equal protection argument prohibiting sex discrimination. So the fight against the male supremacy part of what these cases are about, we're at the beginning of. So we shouldn't be discouraged. We should be ready to fight harder, to fight more collectively, and to look at the website of National Advocates for Pregnant Women and NAPW to see what's happening and what people can do.
Thank you so much, Lynn. I'll go next, and then Marian and Rose, you should close us out. I'm very pleased to say that there is an Asian American and Pacific Islander reproductive justice agenda. So there is a co-created, community-based agenda for action, first ever that we've ever known of. If you go to our website, NAPAWF.org, we've actually made this agenda a petition, so anyone can sign their name to support what the agenda is calling for. And I'll say that the third demand is decriminalization of Asian American and Pacific Islander women's bodies. I think that now is the time when people are paying more attention to us. There is still so much work to be done to tell our stories, to humanize us as people, but we as a community are taking up space. We are making demands. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. And I think that this story that Marian and Rose you've told helps us get there. So
that's we need to keep making these stories and hooking up with folks like you and keep the fight going, I guess.
I guess the positive thing is that the Bei Bei and our other films, this sounds like a plug, but it's really to tell folks that 3 of our films right now are available on Canopy. You can watch them with a library card, and they're made to be used. So it's a very, I have to say, a tough row to hoe being an independent filmmaker. I'm not sure I would recommend it as a wise career choice, but it's it has these wonderful byproducts of, making something that you really do feel reaches people. And I encourage people to continue to use them. Contact us. We've got over the years a huge network, and we're really happy to talk and share and reach out
to your friends.
We're thinking of setting up, a small group, a screening, anything like that. Let us know. Our emails are pretty easy to find on our website, and we'll answer. So
and pass it on to your friends. We want to educate. Change hearts and minds, and films can do that
with a good story. If we put you to sleep, frankly, you're not going to do anything.
No, I think this is a good story.
Yeah.
Right. We all agree this is a good story, painful as it is.
It's certainly one that needs to be told. I just want to do a huge thanks to all of you, the special guests, and to our audience for participating in this call to action roundtable discussion. Thank you, Marian. Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Kelly. And thank all the audience for joining us and playing an active role in the movement to change.
And one last thing, can you each differentiate, because you read the titles and NAPW and NAPAWF seem pretty similar to audiences. So just repeat.
Yes. We are the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. And Lynn?
We are National Advocates for Pregnant Women.
And we are Incite, INCITE, as in start a riot.
Thank you, everyone.